In late 2023, a court in Ontario ruled that this limit was unconstitutional. The government didn't appeal that decision. Instead, it worked on a permanent fix, and that fix became Bill C-3, formerly called an Act to Amend the Citizenship Act. That bill received royal assent in November of 2025 and came into force on December the 15th, 2025. Once it came into force, the first-generation limit was removed for anyone who would have been a citizen, if not for that old rule. And here's the part that surprised a lot of people. This change was automatic. If you fell into that category, you didn't need to wait for approval. You were already considered a Canadian citizen the moment the law took effect. IRCC has estimated that more than 100,000 people around the world suddenly became Canadian citizens this way, many of them adults who had never lived in Canada and had no idea this was coming. Now, being a citizen automatically and being able to prove it are two different things. To actually use that citizenship to get a passport, to travel, to work in Canada without a permit, you still need a citizenship certificate. So starting in December, people began applying for these certificates in large numbers, and IRCC began issuing them. However, that's not the only part of this story. Just a few months later, in June of this year, something unusual started happening. IRCC began quietly sending letters to a number of people who had already received their citizenship certificates under the new rules, telling them to send those certificates back. The department has only ever described the number affected as a few dozen, but the exact total hasn't been made public, and nobody outside the department seems to know exactly how the list of affected people was chosen. This is where the story gets personal, and it's worth walking through a real example, because it shows exactly how disruptive this has been. An American citizen named Tom Maher had traced his family back to an ancestor from Quebec. Under the new Bill C-3 rules, he applied for citizenship certificates for himself, his mother, and a sibling. Those certificates were approved and issued back in April. Then, last week, he received an email telling him his certificate was being suspended and that he needed to return it. Just days after that, without much explanation, the department reversed course again and told him his certificate had actually been revalidated. In his own words, he said he had no problem providing extensive proof of his lineage and no problem being investigated, but once a decision has already been made, there should be some consistency. That's really the heart of the complaint here, not that the government is checking documents carefully, but that people are being told yes, then no, then yes again, within the space of a couple of weeks. So who exactly does this affect? If you already have Canadian citizenship that predates Bill C-3, this doesn't touch you at all. Your status was never in question. The people affected are specifically those who became citizens through the new second generation and later provisions, meaning your Canadian parent was themselves born or adopted outside Canada, and citizenship passed down to you through that chain. If you applied for a certificate under these new rules and received one this year, you are potentially in the group this situation could touch, even if you personally haven't received a letter. There's another important piece here that a lot of people are overlooking. While this review is underway, IRCC has also paused approvals for new citizenship by descent applications filed under the second generation and later provisions. That means if you're currently waiting on a decision, your file may be sitting untouched while the department sorts through what happened with the earlier batch. And this is happening on top of an already serious backlog. According to the department's own website, more than 82,000 citizenship applications are currently sitting in the queue with processing times of at least 15 months. So even before this recall situation, people were waiting well over a year. Now, with a pause on new approvals layered on top, that wait could stretch even further for some applicants. This could affect your application in a very practical way if you're mid-process right now. If your file is one of the ones affected by the pause, you may not see any movement for a while, and IRCC hasn't given a clear timeline for when normal processing will resume. The honest answer right now is that nobody outside the department knows exactly when this will be sorted out, which is exactly why immigration lawyers have been so vocal about wanting clearer communication. Now, many applicants overlook this next point, and it's an important one. The immigration minister, Lena Diab, ordered an internal review after what's only been described as something being brought to her attention. Prime Minister Mark Carney has also said the government will follow up and give timely explanations to the people affected. But as of now, neither has explained publicly what specifically triggered the recalls in the first place. Immigration lawyers who work with these clients regularly have said they were genuinely caught off guard. One lawyer described the department's handling of this as playing fast and loose with citizenship rules, which is actually where the title of this update comes from. Another pointed out that the initial guidelines on what documentation counts as acceptable proof may not have been clear enough when the program first launched, and that better training for officers handling these files early on could have avoided a lot of this confusion. Let's talk about common mistakes, because there are a few things applicants are getting wrong that are worth avoiding, whether or not you're directly caught up in this recall situation. The first mistake is assuming that once you receive a citizenship certificate, the matter is permanently closed and no further documentation will ever be requested. As this situation shows, that's not necessarily true, especially while the department works through what it's calling documentation concerns. The second mistake is not keeping thorough records of your family's connection to Canada. If your Canadian parent was born abroad and you're applying based on their citizenship, you'll want solid proof of that chain, birth records, citizenship documents, and where relevant, evidence of time spent physically in Canada. The third mistake is panicking and assuming the worst the moment you receive any letter from IRCC. As we saw with the example earlier, some of these suspensions were reversed within days. That doesn't mean you should ignore a letter. It means you should respond calmly, promptly, and with proper documentation rather than assuming your citizenship is permanently gone. Here are some practical tips if this situation applies to you or someone in your family. First, if you're planning to apply for a certificate under the second generation or later provisions, gather your documentation now rather than waiting, because the standard being applied may become stricter as IRCC tightens its internal guidelines following this review. Second, if your Canadian parent was born abroad, keep clear records of their time spent in Canada, because for anyone born on or after December the 15th, 2025, the law requires that parent to show at least 1,095 days of physical presence in Canada before the birth or adoption, roughly 3 years. Third, if you receive any letter from IRCC about your certificate, whether it's a request for more information or a suspension notice, don't ignore it and don't assume it's final. Respond within the time frame given and consider speaking with a licensed immigration lawyer or consultant, particularly if the letter is unclear about why it was sent. Fourth, keep checking official IRCC communications rather than relying on secondhand information, because this is an evolving situation and the department has said it will provide more clarity as the internal review continues. So what does this mean going forward? In the bigger picture, this is likely to lead to two things. First, expect IRCC to publish clearer documentation standards for citizenship by descent applications, especially for the second generation and later category, since this is clearly where the confusion originated. Second, expect processing times to remain a challenge for a while yet. With a backlog already sitting above 80,000 applications, and a pause on new approvals while the review continues, this isn't a program that's going to speed up overnight. If you're planning to apply or you're already in the queue, patience and thorough preparation are going to matter more than ever. To bring this all together, Bill C-3 opened the door for well over 100,000 people to become Canadian citizens, by removing the old first-generation limit, and that door is still open. But the way the department has handled proof of citizenship certificates over the past few weeks, issuing them, recalling some, then reinstating them, has understandably shaken confidence among applicants and the lawyers who represent them. If you already have Canadian citizenship from before this law changed, none of this affects you. If you're applying under the new rules, the message is simple: keep your documentation solid, respond quickly and calmly to any correspondence from IRCC, and expect this file to move a little slower than usual while the government works through its own review. If you found this update helpful, consider subscribing, because this story isn't finished yet. The government has promised further explanations, and I'll be covering it the moment there's real news to share. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.